It stood like a wooden altar to agony, simple, brutal, unforgettable. The rack was the most feared torture device in medieval Europe. Its purpose? To pull the truth from a prisoner's mouth, one screaming inch at a time. The victim was tied down, wrists and ankles bound to rollers on each end. At the torturer's signal, the crank turned slowly, limbs stretched, muscles tore, joints popped from their sockets like dry twigs. The pain was excruciating, often unbearable long before the body actually tore apart, and still, the wheel would turn again. Bones didn't always break, but something else did. The will. Confessions spilled out in waves, true or not. Accused heretics named friends. Witches admitted flying on broomsticks. Rebels gave up names they barely remembered. And in this way, the rack didn't just destroy bodies, it dismantled lives. But the rack was never just about the confession. It was about the spectacle, the message. Whether in a private dungeon or a public hall, its creaking wood and cracking joints whispered one thing to all who watched: resist, and this will be you. The church used it, monarchs used it, inquisitors swore by its effectiveness, and though it vanished in later centuries, its legacy endured, etched into history and imagination alike. Shaped like a pair of tongs but lined with jagged, tooth-like spikes, the crocodile shears were deceptively simple and absolutely terrifying. Made from iron and often heated until glowing, this instrument was reserved for traitors, conspirators, and regicides, those who dared threaten the throne. The shears were designed to clamp around a specific body part, typically the fingers, or more gruesomely, the male genitals, depending on the crime. Once clamped, the torturer would either rip the shears away, tearing flesh and muscle, or twist them in place, shredding the body part within like a predator's jaws. Some versions were forged with internal barbs, ensuring that once they closed, they would not open again without tearing everything inside. The heated iron added another layer of torment, burning the skin while ripping through sinew. This was not a device used often, nor casually. It was a punishment of finality, a sentence carried out to eliminate not just the body, but the legacy of betrayal. In some cases, execution followed immediately. In others, the maimed were left alive, permanently marked by their wounds as living warnings to others. The crocodile shears did not ask questions. They answered the crown's fury in cold iron and permanent disfigurement. It stood tall in the village square, wooden, spoked, and reeking of dread. The breaking wheel, also called the Catherine wheel, was not merely a tool of execution. It was a brutal performance of public suffering. The condemned was tied to the wheel, arms and legs spread wide. Sometimes it lay flat, sometimes it stood upright, mounted on a post. Then came the executioner, wielding a heavy iron bar or hammer. One by one, the limbs were smashed, bones cracked like branches underfoot. Each blow was deliberate, spaced, calculated, to prolong agony. In some cases, the shattered limbs were threaded through the spokes, bending the body grotesquely. The broken man or woman might be left there for hours, sometimes days, until death finally came through exposure, blood loss, or a mercy blow to the chest. This wasn't just punishment, it was theatre, a warning etched in screams and twisted flesh. Townsfolk were summoned to witness. Children watched, wide-eyed. Priests muttered prayers as flies circled the blood-soaked wheel. Reserved for thieves, traitors, and killers, the breaking wheel symbolized the shattering of not just bodies but social order. You broke the law broke you. Even in death, there was no dignity. Corpses were left tied to the wheel, displayed like scarecrows, as a grim reminder of obedience. The crows came first, then the silence. It stood in the heart of the town square, made of weathered wood, fixed with heavy iron hinges. The pillory wasn't built to break bones, it was crafted to break dignity. The device featured a wooden board with 3 holes, one for the neck, 2 for the wrists. Once locked in place, the prisoner was exposed, standing upright with no shelter, no privacy, and no escape from the eyes of the crowd. Used for crimes like theft, fraud, blasphemy, or public misconduct, the pillory transformed punishment into public spectacle. Bystanders gathered not just to witness but to participate, throwing rotten food, mud, stones, or worse. Some laughed, others jeered. For the accused, every moment stretched endlessly beneath the scorching sun or the freezing rain. The body suffered from strain, muscles cramping, joints locking, skin blistering. But the true pain was humiliation. Friends, family, neighbors, they all passed by, and in their stares, guilt became more than a sentence. It became a reputation. Sometimes additional punishments accompanied pillory time, branding, shaving heads, or signs hung from the neck listing the crime. And when the sentence was done, the damage often remained. Reputation ruined, trust lost, a life changed forever. Unlike the dungeon's shadows, the pillory worked in broad daylight. It didn't spill blood, it spilled shame. In the medieval world, pain wasn't always dealt by iron. Sometimes the crowd was the executioner, and humiliation the sharpest weapon of all. It was small enough to fit in a hand, yet crafted to silence voices forever. The pear of anguish, shaped like an innocent fruit, hid one of the most grotesque tortures of the medieval world. Made of metal and designed with petal-like segments, the device was inserted into the mouth, rectum, or vagina, depending on the crime or accusation. Then came the key. With each slow turn, the pear expanded, its sharp iron petals pushing outward, tearing tissue, shattering bone, and reducing the victim to uncontrollable agony. The pain was internal, hidden from onlookers, but devastating, intimate, and inescapable. For heretics, the pear was placed in the mouth, an unholy punishment for speaking against the church. For women accused of witchcraft or adultery, the torment was far more invasive. It was meant to punish, to defile, and to silence. Unlike the rack or gallows, the pear of anguish left no dramatic spectacle, no screaming confessions, no cracking bones for an audience to witness, just bleeding, trembling silence, and a lifetime of damage if the victim survived. Rare and specialized, this device was reserved for those the church or the state wanted to punish in the most personal, most shaming way possible. It wasn't just torture, it was domination, a violent intrusion meant to erase defiance from the inside out. And in the cruel logic of medieval justice, suffering in silence was often the final verdict. Among the darkest executions in medieval history was one that needed no grand machine, just a strong rope, a sharp saw, and cold determination. Known simply as the sawing, this punishment was reserved for the most condemned. The victim was hung upside down by the ankles, arms bound tightly behind the back. This position forced blood to rush to the brain, keeping the person conscious, sometimes far longer than nature would allow. Then, slowly and deliberately, two executioners would begin sawing the victim vertically, starting between the legs and working their way upward. Because of the blood flow from the inverted position, unconsciousness was delayed. The individual remained aware through much of the process, a horrifying element that made this method especially feared. The saw itself was not overly large. It didn't need to be. What made this punishment effective was the control, the rhythm, and the agonizing pace. This form of execution was often used for those accused of treason, espionage, or blasphemy. In some regions, it was carried out in public. The crowd would watch in silence or disbelief as justice, in its most brutal form, unfolded before them. It looked like a twisted throne, built from heavy wood or dark iron, its surface covered in countless metal spikes along the seat, back, armrests, and footrest. Known as the Chair of Inquisition, it was a fearsome instrument of confession. The accused was placed into the chair, seated firmly against the iron points. Straps or clamps secured the arms, legs, waist, and neck, leaving no room to move. The body's own weight pressed it down into the sharp spikes. Even the smallest breath caused pain. Some versions of the chair had space beneath to place burning coals, slowly heating the iron. Others were fitted with pressure levers that forced the prisoner deeper into the spikes, increasing the agony. Victims endured extreme discomfort, and the sensation grew worse with each passing minute. This torture device was used to interrogate those accused of heresy or witchcraft. Sometimes it was used alone, and other times alongside other punishments. Many confessed before the chair was even used, its terrifying appearance enough to shake the strongest resolve. The chamber around it was often silent. There were no loud outbursts, just restrained breathing, tightening straps, and the occasional hiss of fire beneath the seat. For the inquisitors, this wasn't just a chair. It was a tool of submission and spiritual purification. They believed that through suffering, a soul might be cleansed of doubt. They looked like blacksmith's tongs, but inside, rows of razor-sharp metal teeth waited to close with terrifying purpose. The crocodile shears, forged from solid iron, were tools of retribution, used not for confession, but for final punishment. Often heated until red hot, the shears were used on those who committed the gravest of crimes: treason, conspiracy, or assassination of royalty. The jaws clamped onto a specific body part, most often the fingers, but in some cases other areas associated with legacy or identity. Once closed, the serrated spikes dug deep. Some designs included internal hooks, ensuring the shears could not be removed without causing further tearing. The heat intensified the agony, scorching the skin while the teeth shredded flesh and tissue. This was not a device used in dungeons or during questioning. It was often used after conviction as a final act of justice or vengeance. In many cases, victims died shortly after. In others, they survived as visibly marked examples, bearing the permanent scars of rebellion crushed by royal power. The crocodile shears didn't need words. They didn't extract truth. They delivered punishment, raw and unforgettable. It was small, silent, and terrifyingly effective. The iron gag wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to erase voices, to silence screams, prayers, and any final plea for mercy. Forged from cold metal, the device typically consisted of a curved iron plate that fit into the mouth, often fitted with spikes or a tongue clamp, and connected to a head harness or straps that wrapped tightly around the skull. Once secured, the gag forced the mouth open or shut, depending on its style, making speech impossible and every breath a struggle. Some versions held the tongue down with sharp prongs. Others pushed a heavy iron plate against the roof of the mouth or under the jaw. The more the victim tried to talk or even breathe, the more pain they suffered. Over time, the jaw ached, the mouth dried, the thirst and suffocation grew unbearable. The iron gag was favored in political interrogations, religious trials, and prison control. Anywhere, silence was power. It was also used on those who refused to confess or answer under torture, turning their defiance into a silent, suffocating punishment. There were no visible wounds, but the damage was real. Teeth cracked, tongues split, jaws dislocated. In some cases, death came from slow suffocation or choking on blood. To the tormentors, this wasn't cruelty, it was discipline. To the victim, it was a terrifying lesson. Even thoughts must be kept inside. It looked deceptively harmless, small, metallic, and shaped like a blooming fruit. But the pear of anguish was no ordinary object. Forged in iron and fitted with mechanical petals, it was designed to punish from the inside, in ways that left no outward marks, only devastation within. The device was placed in the mouth, or, in more severe cases, into other bodily cavities, depending on the nature of the accusation. A small screw mechanism at the base allowed the pear to slowly open. With each deliberate twist, the petals spread wider, pressing against flesh, nerve, and bone. This instrument was often used against those accused of blasphemy, heresy, or moral crimes. For those who dared to speak against the church or state, it silenced words permanently. For others, it inflicted a different kind of ruin, a message that the body itself was no longer sacred. There were no flames, no broken limbs, just a quiet, unbearable pressure. It was torment hidden in stillness, suffering that could last minutes or hours, depending on the cruelty of the torturer. Rarely used in public, the pear was a tool of private punishment, its wounds invisible to crowds, but unforgettable to the victim. Its legacy is a haunting one, a symbol of how far power would go to crush rebellion, not with noise, but with silence. In the shadowed dungeons beneath Europe's castles and cathedrals, a grim spectacle unfolded, one cloaked in divine justice and royal decree. Torture wasn't reserved for criminals alone. Heretics, witches, rebels, even the wrongly accused, could find themselves shackled to instruments built not just to harm, but to break the soul. Iron maidens, flesh-ripping claws, searing brands, and devices that bent the body beyond nature's limits. These were tools of authority, tools of fear, and behind every scream was a message, obedience or suffering. The church claimed it used torture to save souls. The crown wielded it to crush dissent. For the inquisitors, pain became a form of persuasion. If you confessed, you were spared, from further agony, not from death. Yet within this horror lies a deeper story, a society gripped by fear, superstition, and the desperate need for control. Torture chambers weren't just built with stone, they were built on belief. Belief that pain revealed truth, belief that God judged through suffering. Over the next chapters, we'll walk into the darkest rooms of medieval justice. We'll see not just the devices, but the minds that built them and the world that allowed them to flourish. It sat on the torturer's bench like a tool from a blacksmith's forge, solid, mechanical, and cold. But the head crusher wasn't built to shape iron. It was built to destroy the human skull, slowly, precisely, and with terrifying intent. The device consisted of a metal base to hold the chin, and an upper cap that fit tightly over the skull. A screw mechanism connected the top to the bottom. Once the victim's head was secured in place, the executioner began to turn the handle. With every slow rotation, the cap pressed downward, teeth cracked, jaws shattered. The skull creaked under pressure like splitting stone. Blood seeped from the nose and eyes. In many cases, victims lost consciousness, but not before immense pain pulsed through every nerve in the face and scalp. This tool wasn't always used to kill. Sometimes, the process was paused just before the skull caved in, leaving the victim disfigured, disabled, or barely conscious. In such cases, it became not just an instrument of pain, but a tool of public intimidation. Used mostly during the Inquisition and state interrogations, the head crusher was ideal for extracting confessions without needing open wounds or lasting mess. The damage was internal, but the suffering was visible on every trembling face. The silence of the chamber was often broken only by the squeal of iron and the dull crunch of bone. To the torturers, this was not savagery, it was order, and through the crushing of skulls, they believed they were breaking lies to reach the truth. It wasn't the bloodiest device, it didn't crush bones or tear skin, but the iron collar, rigid, heavy, and unforgiving, was a symbol of pure control. It turned humans into prisoners, and prisoners into examples. Made from solid iron, the collar was shaped to encircle the neck, sometimes thick and smooth, sometimes lined with spikes on the inner rim. Once locked, it could not be removed without tools, and often not without pain. The metal dug into the flesh, bruising the throat, limiting movement, and reminding the wearer of every breath they took. Some collars were chained to walls or posts, keeping the victim immobile for days or weeks. Others were designed for public shaming, with bells or tags that announced the crime: thief, blasphemer, traitor. Every jingle marked them in the streets as an object of scorn. The iron collar didn't kill quickly. It exhausted. Muscles stiffened, skin swelled beneath the rim. Infection festered in the open metal ring. In winter, the iron froze to the skin. In summer, it burned in the heat. Used across prisons, castles, and inquisitorial chambers, it punished defiance through endurance, not spectacle. It whispered that pain didn't have to scream. Sometimes it could just sit there, pressing into the spine and crushing the will. At first glance, it seemed simple. A wooden chair mounted on a long beam, positioned over a pond or riverbank. But the dunking stool was not for rest. It was for ritual humiliation and slow torment, especially for those accused of witchcraft, gossip, or moral defiance. The accused, often women, were strapped tightly into the chair, wrists, ankles, and torso bound with rope. The crowd gathered. There were no dark dungeons here, just open sky and the cold surface of the water. Then the beam was lowered, and the prisoner plunged into the depths below. Held underwater, sometimes for minutes at a time, the victim struggled for air as lungs burned and panic rose. When pulled up, gasping and choking, the questions began. Are you a witch? Did you speak to the devil? Silence, or denial, was met with another merciless dunk. If the woman drowned, it was said she was innocent. If she survived, she was declared guilty and often faced further punishment or execution. It was a test with no escape, no fairness, and no justice. More than torture, the dunking stool was public theatre. It sent a message: defy tradition, speak too boldly, or stand too tall, and you would be brought low, submerged, broken, shamed. And as the waters stilled and the laughter faded, the chair hung in the air like a judgment, wet, empty, and waiting for its next confession. It stood like a statue, gleaming, hollow, and shaped like a life-sized bull. But this was no symbol of strength. The brazen bull was a masterpiece of cruelty disguised as art, designed not just to kill, but to turn death into spectacle. Crafted from bronze or brass, the bull was hollow inside, with a trapdoor in the side and a system of pipes beneath the snout. The victim was forced inside, usually naked, and the door was sealed shut. Then, a fire was lit beneath the belly. As the metal heated, the air inside grew unbearably hot. Skin blistered, lungs filled with scorching smoke. The victim screamed, but the bull had been engineered with acoustic tubes that transformed human cries into animal-like bellows. To the crowd outside, it sounded as if a bull were roaring in agony. Invented in ancient times and revived during the Middle Ages for blasphemers, traitors, and enemies of state, the brazen bull was more than a torture device. It was a performance. Royal courts and inquisitions used it to demonstrate power, punishment, and divine justice. The body inside was reduced to ash, but the bull remained pristine, ready for its next victim. Cleaned, polished, and placed in public view, an iron warning in plain sight. No blood was spilled, no blade was drawn, just fire, metal, and the sound of humanity turned into a beast. And as the flames flickered, the message was clear: those who defy authority will burn, and the world will watch. Among the most horrifying instruments of gender-specific torture was the breast ripper, a device crafted to punish women with cruel precision. It wasn't designed to kill quickly. It was made to send a message, one written in pain, blood, and lasting fear. Forged from iron, the tool resembled a set of clawed tongs or a four-pronged metal flower. The ends were sharpened into hooked spikes, and in some cases, they were heated until glowing red. The device was then clamped onto a woman's breast and ripped away with force, tearing skin, muscle, and tissue. This brutal punishment was reserved for those accused of adultery, heresy, witchcraft, or blasphemy, crimes that, in the eyes of medieval justice, threatened not just the body but the moral fabric of society. It was used both in public executions and private torture chambers. When done in public, it was meant to shame as much as injure, a cruel spectacle of control over women's bodies. The screams, the iron, the fire, it all combined into one terrifying lesson. Obedience was expected, and the price of defiance was permanent. The breast ripper left survivors mutilated and broken. For those who didn't survive, it became their final sentence, delivered by fire, enforced by steel. In an age where pain was power, this device symbolized a deeper cruelty, punishment not just of crime, but of identity. While most torture devices stretched the body outward, the scavenger's daughter did the opposite. It folded the human form inward until bones cracked, veins burst, and breath itself was strangled. Made of iron and shaped like an inverted metal A, the device was deceptively simple. The victim was forced into a crouched position, head pressed to knees, arms pulled tight to the sides, legs bent sharply. Once inside, the device was closed like a trap, compressing the body with unbearable force. As the iron closed in, pressure built at every joint. The chest collapsed against the thighs, the spine bent unnaturally, internal organs compressed. In many cases, the intense pressure caused blood to pour from the nose, mouth, and ears. The pain was total, suffocating, a cage made of the victim's own body. Used primarily in Tudor England and often associated with the Tower of London, the scavenger's daughter was seen as a counterpart to the rack. Where one stretched, this one crushed. It was favored for its compact design and ability to inflict maximum pain in a minimal space. Prisoners were often left in the device for hours, muscles trembling, lungs gasping. There was no moving, no shifting, no relief, only the cold iron squeezing tighter with time. The scavenger's daughter didn't ask questions. It demanded submission through silence and suffocation. And for those caught in its iron embrace, the body itself became the prison. It was a tool of simple design, two sharp metal prongs facing up, two facing down, connected by a strap or collar. The heretic's fork wasn't built to kill. It was made to trap the soul in silence, caught between heaven above and hell below. The fork was strapped tightly between the chin and chest, or between the neck and jaw, forcing the victim's head into a fixed, rigid position. Any movement of the mouth, even the slightest nod or whisper, would drive the spikes into flesh. No speaking, no sleeping, no rest. For the church, it was a punishment for blasphemy, heresy, or defiance. The victim wasn't just physically restrained, they were spiritually muzzled. By denying voice, they were denied repentance, denied prayer, denied comfort, left to suffer in still, conscious torment. Often the fork was used in combination with other restraints, arms bound, ankles chained. In some cases, a parchment was hung around the victim's neck with their supposed crime written for all to see. No screams, no pleas, just blood at the throat and silence in the soul. The heretic's fork was less dramatic than the rack or the wheel, but more insidious. It punished not through chaos, but through control. It whispered that suffering could be quiet, disciplined, and endless. For those who wore it, every breath was a blade, and every moment was a prayer that could never be spoken. It stood like a statue of death, tall, hollow, and terrifying. At first glance, the Iron Maiden looked almost regal, shaped like a cloaked woman with a cold, expressionless face. But inside, she was filled with silence and steel. The victim was forced to stand within her narrow frame, body pressed upright. Then, slowly, the heavy doors creaked shut. Dozens of razor-sharp spikes lined the interior, positioned not to kill outright, but to pierce shoulders, limbs, and torso in precise, agonizing places. The heart was spared, so was the face. The goal wasn't death, it was torment. The Iron Maiden didn't scream, she whispered. Blood ran down her base, pooling at her feet as her prisoner bled slowly, sometimes for hours. Every small movement drove the spikes deeper, a cough, a breath, a prayer. Though her origins are debated, and her most infamous form may have appeared in the late Middle Ages, she captured the very essence of medieval cruelty, ritualized pain disguised as justice. Whether used for execution or psychological terror, the Maiden's image endured long after her iron rusted away. She wasn't just a machine, she was a message. Obey the church, submit to the crown, do not question, or the Maiden will embrace you, and no one escapes her arms once they close. It looked almost like a throne, solid, commanding, carved from iron or thick oak. But this was no seat of royalty. The Spanish chair, or iron chair, was a place where the condemned learned the meaning of true agony, one burning second at a time. The victim was strapped into the chair with iron bindings at the wrists, ankles, waist, and neck. There was no escape. Across the seat, backrest, armrests, and even the footrest, hundreds of sharp iron spikes awaited the weight of the human body. Sitting alone was excruciating, but the torment had only begun. Often, fires were lit beneath the chair. Slowly, the metal would heat, becoming a searing furnace. The spikes didn't just pierce, they cooked. Flesh blistered, blood boiled, and still, the body could not move. Every breath became a prayer for death. The torturer watched calmly, adjusting flames, tightening straps, asking questions. The pain wasn't sudden, it was methodical. A drawn-out, smoldering sentence delivered by heat and steel. Victims could remain conscious for hours, the agony rising with the smoke. The Spanish chair was often used for public torture, or as part of a long interrogation. It was less about truth, and more about terror. Just the sight of it was sometimes enough to elicit confessions, real or imagined. This wasn't punishment, it was a demonstration, obey or burn where you sit. In the Middle Ages, the fire beneath your feet didn't come from hell, it came from your fellow man. It looked like armor at first glance, two rigid shells of iron clamped around the lower legs like protective greaves. But the iron boot was no shield, it was a trap, designed not to guard the flesh, but to shatter it. The device encased the victim's foot and lower leg, secured tightly with iron bands or clamps. Then, slowly and deliberately, wedges or blocks were hammered between the boot and the flesh. Each strike forced the iron tighter, compressing bone and muscle with relentless force. The pain began as a deep, crushing ache, but as the strikes continued, the tibia and fibula splintered, ligaments tore, skin split beneath the pressure. In some variations, heated coals were packed around the boot, turning it into a burning coffin of flesh and iron. This punishment was commonly used against rebels, spies, or enemies of the crown, those accused of conspiring against authority. The goal wasn't always death, it was to maim, to disable, to send the condemned limping into the world as a living warning. The iron boot was slow, cruel, and methodical. There were no fast endings, only hours of increasing pressure, pounding hammers, and the awful sound of bones crumbling under metal. To the authorities, it was the perfect blend of message and method, a device that erased defiance one step at a time. And for those who wore it, every shattered bone spoke louder than words. Loyalty was not optional, it was demanded in blood. Small, simple, silent. The thumbscrew didn't look terrifying until the first turn of the handle. Constructed of iron with grooved plates and a turning vise, the thumbscrew was designed to crush fingers, thumbs, or toes between two unforgiving slabs. The torturer would insert the victim's digits into the device, tighten it slowly, and let the pressure do its work. At first it was discomfort, then sharp pain, then a white-hot fire in the bone as cartilage split and nails tore away. With each crank, the crushing force increased, splintering knuckles, flattening joints, reducing flesh to pulp. It didn't kill, it didn't bleed much, but it broke people. The thumbscrew was especially favored by interrogators, easy to use, easy to carry, ideal for extracting confessions in dark castle corners, monastery chambers, or crowded courts. A man might hold out through threats and shouting, but his fingers couldn't lie forever. Its simplicity made it terrifying. There were no elaborate setups or iron maidens, just cold metal, a turning screw, and the sound of bones giving way. Some versions were more elaborate, equipped with spikes or designed to crush both hands at once. Others were heated, adding burning agony to the pressure, but the message remained the same: speak, confess, obey, or feel your will crumple like the bones in your hand. In the medieval world, truth was often found not in the heart, but in what the fingers couldn't endure.